All right, and we're live. Welcome back to the Leading Well podcast series by Blemish. I'm your host, Christian Brown, and I'm super excited for the episode today. We have Dr. Kimberly Grocher, who is a licensed psychotherapist, executive coach, and yoga and meditation teacher. And so today we're going to dive into the topic of mental health in the workplace. And I'm excited to just have this open conversation. So, Dr. Kimberly, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And we've had many conversations before, on on and off camera. So I'm excited to just introduce you to the audience here. And like I said, we've been having this series about building workplaces that feel good and work better. And previously, I've had many professionals, HR leaders, to talk about kind of the work side of it. But I'm really excited to talk about the feel good part of it, the psychology part of it. And so first, let's just get started by maybe you can share your journey into mental health and what inspired you to develop a passion and a career based on this.
Absolutely. So I knew that I wanted to be a therapist in junior high school. I noticed that I really enjoyed listening to people and their stories. I had a lot of questions about why people did the things they did, why they made the decisions and choices they made. And I really just wanted to fundamentally understand people.
Mm,
So I knew that when I went to college and things like that, I was going to major in psychology. I thought I was also going to do medicine
mm.
um, until I got to chemistry. And I was like, no, I think actually,
Not that route.
no, not that route. Picked up film instead. So I was psych and film major. And then decided to go into social work after undergrad, after having a teacher who was a social worker teaching adolescent psychology.
Mm,
And so got my MSW and then started working in the field. And I've been in the field now 20 years, post master's degree. Um, and along the way, I noticed that I really had an interest in several things. First of all, mind body, like the how the mental health was connected to the physical health. There wasn't a lot of conversation about that when I was coming out of school, but I intuitively knew there was a connection. And then also I recognized that I really had uh an interest and an understanding for business and strategy. In the places that I worked in, I was doing my job, but I was also looking at how things were running. And it was like, well, if you just maybe did it like this, might be a little better. Maybe if you just listen to the people
yeah.
who are actually doing the work, like maybe there wouldn't be this disconnect. And that eventually led me to work at a human resources consulting firm. So I actually started off as an EAP clinician, employee assistance program clinician, but
Interesting.
they saw my interest. And so they pulled me over to the account manager side at times. I was still a counselor, but I did a lot of work with the account managers on doing management trainings for their corporate clients, working with leaders and helping them strategize how to best support the mental health and well-being of their employees.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm. That's so good. So you do have both sides. You have the clinical side, and then you also have just the business savvy side as well. Okay, I love
Mhm.
that. So yeah, so we'll definitely have an interesting conversation. So I'm curious about just from your lens, over the last 5 years, how have you noticed the mental health conversation kind of shift? And then where is there still like energy that needs to be placed around that time?
Oh, absolutely. So I think people across the board really started paying more attention to mental health when COVID
Mm.
um came into play because
Yeah.
it it was something we were all grappling with collectively, as well as the things we were made to see by
Mm.
being in place, by being in one place. Things that I would say, if you're a part of a certain group or certain populations, you already knew, but now everybody was privy to it.
Mm.
And so I think that that also brought some realization to mental health, like how are the things that are happening in society politically, in our systems and our structures, how is that impacting our mental health? As well as, you know, the tremendous loss that we're facing from COVID, having to navigate working from home,
Mm.
what that meant for our relationships, inside the home and outside the home. And so there were just so many things that mental health could not be ignored. I think you saw more businesses and companies uh, paying attention to the mental health of their employees, right?
Mm.
Um, Partly because it's what was happening, but also because it was really affecting the bottom line
Yeah.
um, in a major way. In the last couple of years, I feel like we are starting to shift away from that conversation
Mhm.
um, for a number of reasons. Um,
Yeah.
Different ideologies about what really impacts mental health and what doesn't. But there, it still needs to be part of the conversation. I think in certain groups and certain subcultures, it still is. Um, but across the board, I feel like at some of the higher levels, it's being challenged.
Yeah. Some of these conversations that I'm having, I hear kind of a similar sentiment to where around COVID, there was a lot of conversation and even initiatives put in place that really uh, talked about and put energy towards mental health. And there was value, right?
Yes,
There's value, and now kind of getting away from that conversation, but the need for that value is still present. So
absolutely.
I'm hearing that there still is like a need, and people are noticing, leaders are noticing just the difference between when there was more energy around it versus now.
Hmm.
I mean, of course, just employees and workers, even leaders are still impacted by it. So for you, like what are some of the most common like mental health challenges that you see employees facing in today's workplace?
Oh my goodness. Anxiety,
Mm,
depression, trauma.
mm,
I just got finished last month having a conversation on LinkedIn with somebody about workplace trauma. Um, so those are a lot of the issues that I'm seeing related to that are burnout, um, high levels of stress. Um, so there are tremendous number of mental health issues that are connected to the workplace for sure.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And then when you think about just like spotting that from a leader standpoint, right? What are some ways that burnout can manifest differently than just high stress, right? What are some other ways that burnout can manifest, and then how can leaders spot it early on?
Yeah, so if you notice a change in an employee's performance, right? If you notice that maybe they used to work a certain way or at a certain level and maybe now that has shifted or declined. Um there's also looking at their mood. And so a lot of times people think that if somebody's depressed, they're going to walk around, kind of
Well,
looking depressed, or if they're anxious, they're going to be, and that's it doesn't always manifest that way, right? So maybe it's noticing that somebody is not engaging with the team as much as they used to, right? They're kind of isolating themselves.
yeah.
Maybe it is noticing that they are maybe more irritable or agitated than they typically are, maybe becoming more short. Um, and a lot of times we want, employers, leaders want to kind of correct that. They want to go straight for the corrective action instead of asking, well, why? Especially if this is not typical, right? Why, what's happening, what's going on that this person is responding or behaving in this manner.
Mhm.
Um, you may not necessarily see anything. There may not be a change in behaviors, but maybe that this person has just experienced a significant loss or a significant life change.
Mhm.
Even if it's around positive things like they just got married or they had a baby or, things like that. A lot of times people are like, well, what, these are great things, but there's an adjustment period and
Yeah.
and there's a lot that can um, come with these life changes, a recent move, a recent relocation.
Mm,
Um, so just I tell leaders I work with starting to think about the whole picture,
mm,
you know, as much as you can. Understanding you're not a therapist, it's not that you need to go fix it or treat it or anything like that, but you do want to be aware and maybe offer some resources or direction on where somebody can go for support.
interesting. When you say look at the whole picture, do you mean like what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so a lot of times we tend to be fixated on the role or the relationship as it is right here, right? So if you are my employee, Christian, and you're showing up to work late all of a sudden, or um you're kind of short with me, or you're not as responsive as you used to be, I might say, well, I don't know what's going on, but you got to fix this behavior. And so now, like, we're going to have a one-to-one and we're going to talk about, what needs to change, as opposed to, well, one, I've been working with you for a while, so I know that this is not typical, right? And I know a couple months ago you took time off to go to a funeral, you
Mm,
know? And so while no, you don't have to treat me like a counselor and I don't have to pry into your business, I can notice that, you know, I notice a shift, I notice a change in these areas. Is something going on? Is there something you want to talk about? Or is there a way we can support you so that you have what you need to be able to do what needs to be done?
That's good. And it makes me think about empathy. And I
Mm-hmm.
think empathy is just care and understanding, right? So
Mm-hmm.
first is caring, then understanding. Not even maybe if you don't even understand their situation, but just knowing understanding humanity, right? And understanding
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
As humans go through things and
Yeah, I do a lot of work with couples, and one of the things I talk to couples about early on is empathy. And so a lot of people misunderstand empathy. They think empathy is giving somebody a pass or giving somebody an excuse or even invalidating your position or how you feel. And it's not. It's simply saying from this person's position, from their standpoint, this is their experience. This is how they feel. And I can acknowledge that. I may not agree with it. That may not be my standpoint, but I can at least acknowledge this is where you are and what you're experiencing. And that's really important, I think, as a leader and as a manager, because when people feel heard, when they feel seen, when they feel acknowledged, you, you don't realize how much power that has.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. No, that's so good. I love that.
Mhm.
In your opinion, what does a mentally healthy workplace actually look like day to day?
Ooh, that's See, I think that was my initial reaction because I think there are so many factors,
Okay.
right? Because it's not just one or two things across the
Mm,
board,
yeah.
depending upon the context that you're working in. Because somebody who's working in retail, has a
Mm,
different day to day than somebody who's working in a warehouse
right.
versus somebody who's working in a corner office,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, um, but in general, I think definitely having good relationships is important, having a place where people feel like they're connected and that they can, where they feel like they're connected and they feel like they can use their voice and their voice is respected.
Mm,
Um, I think what was coming to my mind that made me pause a bit was this idea of being who they are in the workplace. And I think that's a whole nother topic, right? Because we know that that's not the reality for everybody,
yeah.
you know? And so what I'm thinking of now is more so like good enough,
Mm,
right? What is good enough and having, again, having good relationships, having um communication,
mm,
having a sense of empathy, recognizing that people's lives are not just this job, this not just this role,
right.
um, and that putting policies and systems in place that recognize that and honor that are really important because it also helps with retention and sustainability, of your employees. And I think a lot of workplaces don't see that. They try to get the most out of people. There's like this expectation that I was talking to a client the other day. The expectation is that you're always on. You're
Mm,
always available.
mm.
And it's like that is not sustainable. Like this this productivity, this anxiety that is driving it. Everything is also part of the reason why we have so many mental health issues in the workplace. Like, it's not healthy that somebody goes home from work and is sitting at their dinner table with their family and is looking at their text messages or their emails for the next thing to come in so they can respond. And that's the expectation across the board, even when you're on vacation. That's
Wow.
the reality of a lot of workplaces these days.
Yeah.
You know, um, that's not healthy. That's not what's best for the employee, and ultimately, it's not going to be what's best for the organization either.
Yeah. Is there a term for that? Like, it makes me think about about anxiety,
Hmm.
maybe. Like, that's very anxious. Um, anxious behaviors always like look, but is there a term for that, for what you just described, in terms of someone just like leaving office even on vacation, just always feeling like they have to be on, always checking their notification, their email? Yeah.
Well, I think the traditional term would have been workaholic, but
Okay.
I don't think it's necessarily a workaholic.
Yeah.
A workaholic, when I think of a workaholic, I think of somebody that is just so driven or engaged in the work that they just can't let it go.
Yeah.
Whereas what I'm seeing in my work are more people who are working because they're anxious, they're hypervigilant. You know what I mean? It's like I'm trying to avoid consequences,
Mhm.
negative consequences in the workplace. I'm trying not to be that person that's not pulling their weight. I don't want to be that team member,
Yeah.
and so they're working obsessively or compulsively, not so much because they want to, but because it's like, well, what's the alternative if I don't?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting, because I'm even just thinking about a situation that I'm close to, where leader of an organization, they have just, there's one person that just works super hard and they love it, right? But they don't understand that they're working that hard because they had previous trauma around working in a similar environment, and they had to perform that way.
Mhm,
And so there's a disconnect, right,
mhm,
between the leader
mhm.
and the employee. So what does it look like to address that from both lenses, from the leader's perspective and then from the actual employee, like doing the work from a place of like anxious trauma? Like, what does healing look like in this situation?
Well, I think, first of all, leaders have to take a look at themselves and how they lead. Because a lot of times, if there's not always, but a lot of times, anxiety trickles down. So you have the anxious leader
Mm,
who's anxiously like, come on, blah, 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 blah.
mhm.
And so then the employees pick up on that and then they become, you know what I mean? And it's not necessarily their anxiety. It's trickling down. Right. So leaders really have to take a look at themselves and how am I leading? What example am I setting for my team? What am I communicating, not just verbally, but by my actions and my behaviors and the boundaries that I set or the expectations I set on this work in this workplace or on this team, right? So really having a heart to heart with yourself as a leader, maybe working with a coach to
Mhm.
kind of help you assess how effective you are as a leader and maybe where some of your blind spots are and where things need to shift. Um, and then in terms of the employee, first of all, recognizing if I'm able to navigate whatever, I might be putting on them, is there a shift or a change? And if it's not, again, maybe it's having that conversation and maybe it's setting some preliminary boundaries with the employee, like, so, or the team, maybe not even singling out the person, right? The team.
That's good.
Okay, so between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., if you send an email, please understand you may not get a response,
Mm,
right? It's
right.
total. If you want to get it out because you're thinking about it, that's your affair, right? If you got time. But if you don't get a response, you probably won't get a response until the next morning. So
Mhm.
just setting that expectation that this is our norm, right? Taking some of the weight off of the employees for that, right? Um, Thinking about how you influence the culture. Again, now then helping sorry.
Mhm.
Then figuring out what is actually the employee stuff, right? And that's where maybe you need to have that conversation with them if you meet with them one on one, you know, framing it as a check in, and then offering additional supports through HR or whoever your support team is,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But it can be challenging to figure out what's the result of leadership and what's the result of somebody else's own um trauma, stress, things like that that may not necessarily be related to this workplace. That
Mhm.
may be related to things that happened outside of or before
Mhm.
this environment ever came into their life,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so recognizing that that might be at play and offering supports and resources
Mhm. Yeah.
without trying to diagnose somebody.
Right. 100%. And then for the person that's experiencing just the trauma and the yeah, like the anxiety that comes from the trauma, what are some things that they can do to just start on their I guess first address it and then start on their like healing journey to just help them to be more I guess healthy at work.
So my first recommendation is always therapy.
Really?
You
Like
know,
mm,
um, finding somebody that can help you start to tease out
mm,
what is work, what are maybe things that have happened in the past that you're still reacting to, what are some of the things happening in your life that may be contributing to how you feel, you know? Um, and then developing a plan for how you're going to manage that, how you're going to heal, how you're going to cope. So my first recommendation is always therapy, and you can choose how you want to access that therapy, whether it's through your EAP. A lot of organizations have employee assistance programs.
mhm,
If you don't feel safe or, you know, EAP, we're supposed to keep things private, is confidential, things like that, unless, of course, you are going to harm yourself or somebody else. But other than that, it is confidential. But still recognizing some people they don't want anything to do with what their employer is offering.
mm,
Right.
crazy, yeah.
And that's understandable. So then maybe seeking therapy on your own. So going to directories like Psychology Today, talking to your physicians, asking for recommendations. Maybe you know people in your life who are seeing therapists and maybe they can offer some recommendations, or their therapist can offer recommendations to their colleagues.
Mm, yeah.
Hmm.
No, that's good. And I want to talk to you about psychological safety.
Hmm.
What is what's your definition of psychological safety, like under the umbrella of work, in workplaces? Yeah, what's your definition of psychological safety, and then like what does that look like practically?
Psychological safety. I think I think of it as a place where I can mentally and emotionally express myself, or a person can express themselves. Um, there is respect for my mental and emotional health, right? Um, and there are more factors that are in place to protect my psyche than there are to break it down.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, love that. What are some simple simple low cost ways to create psychological safety on a team?
So again, that communication factor is key.
Mm,
Being able to openly communicate, um, and being aware if there are consequences to communication, and then how to reduce those consequences if there are. So those consequences may not necessarily be a formal reprimand, right? But it might be um, a sense of not being as good as everybody else
Mm.
or as able to take on things as everybody else. Or there might be a shift in attitude towards this person, right? So recognizing what are the explicit and implicit consequences to being open and communicating on the team, eliminating or reducing those as much as possible, and creating a culture where there is dialogue, and dialogue is welcome, and dialogue is dealt with or coped with whatever comes up.
Mm.
Um, so a lot of that also involves making sure everybody on the team is as mentally well as physically well as they can be, right? So again, it's not perfect, but offering supports, right? Because if we're working on the same team and I come to you with a concern and you're not able to hear me because you're dealing with your own stuff, and it's always like, oh well, it's always thrown back, it's never received. That's a problem. That's
Mm.
a problem for the whole team, right? So what needs to happen with how I'm communicating so you can hear, but also on your end, what needs to happen? What do we need to provide, or how can we support you so that you're able to hear feedback?
Mm. Yeah. Interesting.
Um,
Yeah. And I'm sure you've been in situations where you've been contracted to work on environments where these things are needed. So what's an example, without of course going to, sharing any like confidential information, but what's an example of just uh the place where an organization is to where they call on someone like you to come in and help? Like what is the workplace looking like? What are the people feeling like? Um yeah, when
yeah. So these are broad strokes. It might look like having an employee or employees who are clearly not having a good work-life balance.
Mm.
And the way that tends to show up is that they are often defensive. If they're in a leadership position, they may have difficulty delegating because they feel like I need to own this, I need to keep this, I need to do it all. And it's not something that can be done by one person. It is a team effort. Um, it may be clear noticing that somebody is struggling with anxiety or depression. Maybe they've expressed it, or you're seeing signs or changes in behavior. Um, so usually that's when I'm called in. Or if somebody's been promoted because they have done a great job in their role, but now they're being promoted to leadership,
Mhm.
and being a good line worker and being a good leader are two different things.
Yeah.
You know that. And so maybe they need some support around learning to be a leader and a manager.
Mhm.
And what's different in this role now.
Yeah.
So I'll come in, and I usually work with um the leaders of the organization who are inviting me in, and we kind of talk about what the situation is. I ask questions and probe them to consider their policies, their systems that are in place, and maybe how this is contributing or to the issue, or maybe how maybe it can support change or turnaround. I'll often be asked to coach a employee or employees.
Mm.
Um, which I love doing, so then I get to work with them around how they're seeing the issue and experiencing it, as well as helping them develop as a leader, as a manager, and helping them to recognize, like, how are you coping? What are your stress management strategies? What is your work-life balance, and supporting them in communicating boundaries,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's good. And then I'm curious about the metrics in place too, because that's sometimes conversations that I have when talking with HR leaders about just investing in well-being and just tying it to actual metrics. So what metrics are usually top of mind for you? And like, are you what metrics are what metrics are top of mind for you as you just work throughout your process of helping a team or employee?
Yeah, so that is organization specific, that is department specific, and that is usually the first conversation I have with the leaders who are bringing me on. So how are we going to know this is effective? What are you expecting from this employee or employees or this team to be different at the end of my work with them or the end of my work with you? So that might be monetary in terms of an increase in sales or an increase in sales while also delegation, like an increase of sales of maybe members of the team who are under this particular employee. Um, actually, in one case, it was like leader actually needed to reduce their sales so the
Wow.
so their employees could have, like so that it was more evenly distributed
Okay.
across the team,
Yeah.
right? And so that's one metric. Another metric might be productivity, right? Years expected to close X number of accounts or cases or, whatever in a certain period of time, and that's not happening. So now the metric becomes how do we help you reach this
Mhm.
number? What needs to happen um, for you to do that from a holistic perspective? So it could be monetary, it could be looking at retention rates over time. It can be looking at the use of employee health benefits and comparing that to productivity or outcomes. So it really depends on the organization, but that should definitely be a part of the first conversation. How are we going to know that this is working, that
Yeah.
change is happening?
That's good. So it's important for the leader to already know kind of what they're looking to achieve, um, from a like metric standpoint, what they're looking to improve upon. And
Yeah, or having some idea, and sometimes having like me, like if I'm coming in as a consultant or a coach, part of that initial conversation be can help clarify that.
nice.
Mhm.
Awesome. That's awesome. Okay, and a couple more here. I'm curious about when someone brings just say a consultant or a coach or a mental health professional in, and it just doesn't go well. What are common mistakes that organizations make when rolling out, let's say, wellness based initiatives?
I love this question. Okay. So the first thing is making sure you have the right consultant or mental health professional for the job.
Mm,
Um, because yes, as far as mental health um professionals, we are all trained in, psychology, mental health theories, tools, things like that. But everybody's experience is different. So, like for example, if you know Dr. Bob over here from, because she's your wife's friend's cousin, right? And this is how things often happen, right? But
yeah.
but this person works with children.
Mm,
But
yeah,
because you know them, you want to bring them in,
interesting.
and you're thinking, oh well, mental health, mental health across the board. No, no, no. But that's not what they do. That's not their specialty. And it's not to say they couldn't, but finding the right professional to help you and your team that maybe has some specialty or special training or expertise in what you're actually dealing with is important. The other thing is making sure to really be talking to that professional um, and maybe implementing some of what they're saying. Because that's the other thing, too. A lot of times, companies and organizations will bring professionals in, and it's kind of like a figurehead.
Mm,
Well, you're here, like we have you,
right.
and so it's,
Mm,
it's, it's optics, right?
yeah, yeah.
But we're actually not really interested
Mm,
in implementing anything you're talking about or anything you say. You just need you for the optics. So that's another thing. And being really honest and clear about that. Um, what else? Can this person build rapport with the leaders as well as the team.
Mm.
That's another thing as well. Um, Also, making sure whatever you're doing wellness wise is actually meaningful to the employees or the team.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I see that organizations stick things in place without actually consulting with the employees. And then it's like, well, we didn't ask for this, and this is not meaningful to us. And so this is not helpful, and then there's more tension because it's like, well, we invested in this. And it's like, but we didn't ask for that. Like, we've been asking for something very specific, and are, you're not acknowledging it, and you're going and doing something totally different. So now I feel ignored.
Mm. Wow.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah.
So getting buy-in from the team.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that. I've seen, yeah, I've experienced that. So I understand that firsthand. But yeah, okay. So this is great. So I think we had a very expansive conversation around like what just first the overall landscape of like mental health in the workplace, what that actually looks like, what some signs are, how leaders can spot early on maybe an employee that is possibly nearing towards burnout or anxiety or even trauma, and then talks about like what kind of that program looks like or what it looks like to bring someone like you in, and then what are some common mistakes. So that's good. So what's like a final I guess a final call to building healthy workplaces that feel good and work better. Um yeah, from your standpoint that we could end this episode off with.
Absolutely. So, one, I would love to encourage leaders and decision makers to really think about how their policies, their systems, their procedures, the culture, both spoken and unspoken, either contribute to employee well-being or takes away from it.
Mm.
And recognizing that you have some control there. And you may not have all the answers, but there are supports. There are people like me. I have colleagues, consultants. There are people that are trained and specialized in this to be able to come in and help you navigate that. You don't have to know exactly what to do, but you do have to know something needs to be done and you got to do something about it. And then for the employees, I would encourage, again, staying on top of your mental health and your well-being, doing whatever you need to do in terms of finding a therapist, finding a coach, taking time off, you know, understanding how to work with your workload so that, you know, it is beneficial to your mental health. Because what I see a lot of times is people want to give their all for the job, which is great. I mean, that's nice. And also,
Yeah.
what happens when they no longer need you or you burn yourself out to the point where you're sick and now you've got to take leave,
Mm.
right? Um, so yes, having a good work ethic. Look, I was raised to have a good work ethic. That's important to me and everything. But also you got to understand that you take you wherever you go. So
Yeah.
you may not always be with this job, right?
Definitely.
Okay. 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 So for employees, I would just keep in mind that, you know, you take you with you wherever you go. So your mental health, your physical health, um, are a priority and they are not replaceable. A job is,
Mm.
and a job will replace you when having you is no longer a benefit or serving the organization.
Mm.
So while I encourage and applaud a good work ethic, and doing good work and being a value, bringing value, absolutely, but recognizing that when there's a cost to your health or your mental health, is that cost something that can be managed where you are, or or does that need to change? Or do you need to be doing something differently?
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So good. Well, thank you so much for your time,
Absolutely.
Dr. Kimberly. I'll have your LinkedIn attached to the episode. So is LinkedIn the best place for people to find you and get in touch with you and your work?
LinkedIn. They can also check me out on Instagram at Dr. Kimby Grocher. And you can also check out my podcast, Thriving Outside the Box with Dr. Kim.
Lovely, lovely. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for watching another episode of the Leading Well podcast series. And I'll see you all in the next one.
Thank you so much.